Hi everybody, welcome to our next lesson here, spread of aggression. Okay, our objectives and standards. Explain how countries became aggressive and created tension, and analyze attempts to solve conflicts around the world. And please take a look at the standards. Our desired result, how did aggressive nations create tension and conflict around the globe? Alright, vocabulary preview. We have a couple words here. Appeasement, giving in to an aggressor to keep the peace. Axis powers, which are Germany, Italy, and Japan in an alliance. Isolationism, which is the belief that political ties to other countries should be avoided possibly. And the Third Reich, which we'll talk about a little bit, is the idea of a German empire. Alright, so let's talk about Japan. So the Asian island country had many reforms in the 1920s. But soon after that, though, Japan fell under the rule of the military. When Japan faced economic difficulties in the 1930s, again, talking about global depression and things like that, the people began to blame the government. Now, military leaders soon gained power and control. However, unlike Mussolini and Hitler, who wanted to remove the current government and the current leaders and things like that, the Japanese do not do that. They still keep their emperor, who is Emperor Hirohito, but they mainly use him as kind of like a symbol of power and more of like a figurehead almost. They really have more of the control and say about what goes on. So there were also extreme nationalists in Japan that believed that the way to solve their economic problems was through foreign expansion, so moving beyond their borders. They wanted to establish a Pacific empire that did include the country of China, and we talked about that a little bit when we were talking about China a few weeks ago with how Japan invaded China. But this new empire would increase supply of raw materials, which the Japanese were kind of craving, and allow for more room for a rising Japanese population. So Manchuria. So Japanese businesses had invested in the northeast province of Manchuria in China. It had a large amount of coal and iron in the region. So in 1931, the Japanese military invaded the area despite the objections of the Japanese parliament. So again, the military, even though there's still some type of government setup, the Japanese military is really kind of in control and making decisions. The military then established a puppet government there. And when the League of Nations opposed the invasion by the Japanese really don't listen. Again, the League of Nations didn't really have a lot of power, didn't have a lot of force behind it, so it's kind of like a slap on the wrist almost when the League of Nations kind of punishes a country. These countries really don't, care to listen to them. And then with that said, Japan did leave the League of Nations in 1933, so shortly after they invaded Manchuria. So 4 years later, Japan decided to invade the entire country of China. And the Chinese, again, we talked about this a little bit, but the Chinese were no match for the Japanese military. The Japanese murdered many civilians, men, women, and children, elderly people, all that stuff, and destroyed cities and towns. Now, despite these losses, the Chinese are going to continue to fight back to regain their country. So again, the Japanese are still going to have some, some struggles in China. All right, so Ethiopia. So one of the few independent countries in Africa was Ethiopia. Mussolini wanted to get revenge for the Italian failed invasion of the country back in 1895. We talked about that again a couple weeks ago too. So in October of 1935, Mussolini launched a massive invasion of Ethiopia. Now Ethiopia couldn't again stand up against the Italian military. So Ethiopia and their emperor Haile Selassie, I believe is how you say that, pleaded for the League of Nations for assistance. Okay, so they plead with the League of Nations to take action. Again, the League of Nations says, hey, don't do that. You should stop doing that. But again, really can't do anything. So again, with Japan expanding and with Italy now expanding, other European nations and other countries around the world are saying, well, wait a minute, if they can get away with it, why can't we? So again, aggressive nations are going to begin to kind of expand a little bit more because they know that no action is going to be taken against them necessarily. So France and Great Britain hoped by allowing Mussolini to have Ethiopia that they could avoid another conflict. So again, the world does not want to get into another war. So the countries are going to do whatever they can to, appease these countries, these aggressive nations, and do whatever they can to give them what they want to avoid some type of, another war. In March 1935, Hitler decided to go against the Treaty of Versailles and rebuild Germany's military forces. Remember, we talked about how Germany was not allowed to have a military force large enough to invade another country under the treaty, but Hitler decides to do it anyway. Now, the League of Nations, again, issues a mild kind of, threat warning, whatever. And in March 1936, a year later, German forces moved into the Rhineland, an area that was kind of like a buffer zone between France and Germany. Now, France is really not prepared or willing to, go to war or risk war, and the British are going to kind of offer appeasement as a way to resolve the issue. So, Germany will now gain the Rhineland, which was also a key industrial area as well. So again, like we just said, giving these countries what they want to avoid another war. So the invasion of the Rhineland gave Hitler the strength and power to continue his territorial goals. It also caused Mussolini to kind of notice the German leader. So in October 1936, Germany and Italy signed an agreement and formed what is known as the Rome-Berlin axis. Obviously, the Rome being the capital of Italy, Berlin being the capital of Germany, so that's where we get the name from. But they form an alliance. A month later, Germany is then going to sign an agreement with Japan. So now Germany, Italy, and Japan are now going to form this alliance known as the Axis powers. So let's talk about Spain a little bit. So Spain also faced a change in their government during the times. So tired of socialists and liberals running their government, army leaders supported General Francisco Franco in revolt. So in July 1936, the Spanish Civil War begins. Okay, so you're going to have the people who want to keep the government, and also, I believe they were known as the nationalists. Then you have Franco and his group. Okay, now what happens here is other world nations are going to become involved in this conflict. Hitler and Mussolini themselves sent supplies and troops to support Franco. Great Britain, France, and even the United States, they really don't take a stand in support of the people fighting back against Franco. There are volunteers that go over to Spain to help, like I said, these nationalist forces fight back against Francisco Franco, but they're unsuccessful at it, and Franco is going to gain power of the country, and he's going to become a dictator in 1939. So again, another rise of dictators comes to power. So instead of trying to stop aggressive nations, France and Great Britain sought to appease those countries to avoid the horrors of another conflict worldwide. And Americans were also not in favor of another war. Many were supporters of isolationism and, staying at not forming alliances or ties with any countries and, wanting to remain neutral. So in 1935, the U.S. Congress passed 3 neutrality acts that banned loans and the sale of arms to nations at war. So again, the United States is really looking to kind of stay out of any type of foreign conflict as well. November 5th, 1937, Hitler stated to his advisors about plans to take Czechoslovakia as well as Austria. He wants to form a Third Reich, which is kind of like a German empire, and it's called the Third Reich because Hitler knows his history and believes that this will be the third successful empire in German history. The Treaty of Versailles banned an alliance between Germany and Austria. However, many Austrians were in favor of a union with Germany. So in March 1938, German forces marched into Austria pretty much unopposed and were pretty much welcomed by the Austrians. I've seen videos and things like that of the Austrians having a parade for these German troops coming in, and Germany takes control of Austria. France and Britain did not hold up their end of the bargain or agreement to kind of support defending these countries against foreign invaders and things like that. After Austria, Hitler's going to turn his territorial goals to the country of Czechoslovakia. There's a section of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland. Now, the Sudetenland was a western border region that had German-speaking residents in it. So in September 1938, Hitler demanded that the area be given to Germany. When Czechoslovakia refused, they looked to France for help. So Great Britain and France are, pretty much tired of Hitler now at this point, right? I mean, I think most people are getting tired of Hitler's trying to take all this different land and territory. So they begin to prepare for war when Mussolini kind of steps in and goes, wait, let's pause for a minute and let's have a meeting. Let's have a meeting between Germany and France and with Great Britain. So on September 29th, 1938, there's this thing called the Munich Conference, okay? It takes place in Germany. And British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, along with the French, they agree to accept Hitler's demands. So they agree that they're going to turn the Sudetenland over to Hitler. And in response, Hitler says that he will respect the Czechoslovakian borders. He only wants the Sudetenland. He won't touch anything else in Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain then goes out to the media and the public and states, that this German issue with Hitler, is resolved. He actually kind of says Hitler, doesn't seem that bad, and Hitler, is kind of, I don't want to say a nice guy, but he kind of, believes Hitler and accepts what Hitler's saying, and that there's going to be peace, that there's not going to be another war. With that said, there's a lot of people around the world that are still kind of nervous of Hitler and his plans, and you're going to see why. So less than 6 months after the agreement in Munich, Hitler invades Czechoslovakia, takes over the entire country. So he breaks his promise that he wasn't going to take Czechoslovakia. Mussolini then turns around and invades Albania. So again, these dictators are just not following through with their promises. Hitler then demanded from Poland this German port known as Danzig. Okay, Poland refuses, and they ask for assistance from France. Hitler is, again, pretty confident that the French or the British would do nothing. He doesn't, again, nobody stopped him yet, so he doesn't believe anybody will stop him now. And then on the French and the British also wanted the Soviet Union, Stalin, to kind of step in and provide assistance to stop Hitler. But Stalin, he's kind of playing both sides. He's listening to the French and the British to see what they're going to offer him, and then he's listening to Hitler to see what Hitler's going to offer him, and he takes an agreement with Hitler, and they sign a non-aggression pact on, August 22nd, 1939, that stated neither would attack the other. So now we have Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Soviet Union in an alliance. Alright, so to wrap up here with our closure, how did aggressive nations create tension and conflict around the globe? What types of actions did people in, or leaders in Germany and Japan and elsewhere take that, create a lot of tension and conflict around the globe that is unfortunately going to lead us to World War II? Alright, so think about that. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and try your best on the questions that follow, and I'll talk to you soon.